All right. I think I'm out of bag. All right, so let's get going with why we're here now. My name is Tim Magnet. My company is Teamergent Technologies. You only need to know that because I have a whole bunch of free tools that if you're interested in applications and getting them deployed out might be of help to you. Okay. So this session is about things that are changing. And for this particular audience, it's really about trying to, at a very early stage, get the knowledge so that you can talk to your customers about what's coming. Because there's a bunch of people getting excited about this, and you don't really have to worry about it yet, okay? There will be a time that comes and things change, we'll have to worry about it, but it's not now. So if we take a look at the current way that we put out traditional applications, we use a different mechanisms, basically to get things inside the image and then apply them additional pieces outside of the image as well. So you could be using Configuration Manager or one of these other solutions that are up here as a way to do that and make the applications a little more dynamic, but you end up in the end needing to get them into desktops so that end users can access them. Now Microsoft, of course, wants us to move to modern management. And modern management, still we can deliver things in the image, but we have slightly different tools to deliver them after the logon. So we're trying to get used to that a little bit. It's a little bit of a different model, particularly some of the strange things Microsoft has done. For example, if you take the AppX-based applications that want to work with file associations. The file associations methods and the way that they're registered are different for those than they are for the traditional applications. And we're starting to see a few problems with that. If anybody has installed Adobe Reader on Windows 10, you immediately notice Windows keep coming back and say, oh, I see someone changed the PDF. I'm going to put it back to Edge for you. Thank you very much, Microsoft. All right, so the modern management can handle the Windows Universal programs. And it can also handle the things that came out of Centennial, which is now called Bridges for Windows. This was an attempt by Microsoft to bring a portion of the old software forward into this new model. One thing we've asked for a long time has been, hey, why can't we put AppV packages up in the Windows Store? Why can't we deliver those through modern management as well? And so far, those calls have fallen on deaf ears from Microsoft. But here within the last couple months, they have announced a new thing called, if I hit the right button, there we go, MSIX, which is their answer to that going forward. Yeah. All right, so let me go back in history a little bit. My very first opportunity to visit the Redmond campus happened in 2001. It was an event that they called Hailstorm. Anybody know what Hailstorm was? Okay, it was Microsoft.net. So the MVPs here would recognize that building, the Executive Briefing Center, Building 33 in Redmond, otherwise known as the place the bus drops us off. We try to figure out where we're supposed to be. But I was at the Hailstorm announcement there, and this was all about solving a problem they had with Sun Microsystems. So Microsoft has done a very good job over the years of owning the developers and winning them over from the Unix world. And Sun had come up with this great idea called Java. And the promise of Java was write once, run anywhere. And this scared them. They saw a lot of people going over and they needed an answer. And their answer was .NET. And so they announced .NET. And ultimately, they were successful in killing off Java, although not necessarily because of .NET. It's just because of what Sun did with Java and made it incompatible as they went forward. That's one thing Microsoft has always been very, very good at, is providing backward compatibility. As they change the operating system, as they change the Windows APIs, they do so in a way that is generally very backward compatible so the old stuff continues to run. And that, ultimately, that was really Java's biggest problem, not all the other things. So that was Microsoft's plan A, and they were pretty successful with that. And what Microsoft did with .NET is they made these things run side by side, and that's how they solved the backward compatibility problem. They were able to bring in a new version of .NET but put it side by side with the old. The old stuff would continue to use the stuff that was there, and the new stuff would use the newer versions. And that worked pretty well. Now Plan B, the sort of skip part of that, right? So at 2001, the Windows API at that point was 15 years old. It had been updated every 2 years, and it was starting to get a little hairy. So moving to a new API, which was the .NET API, was part of getting under some of that legacy. Plan B, because a lot of that stuff was still around, was what was originally called tile apps. It actually started a little bit at the phone, right? They lost more developers out to iOS. They wanted to bring those developers back, so they started with the phone, and they tried to make their phone cool, like the iPhone, and so we got the tiles, right? And they liked it so much, because Microsoft believes their own bullshit, that not only did they put it on the phone, they brought it to our desktop. And it took half the desktop away, right? Okay, eventually they figured that out, and the desktop was all over everything we really wanted to see. So eventually they ended up doing things like they had to rename the way that new app model worked, right? So they called it Metro App, and then they found out they couldn't do that because the company owned that. So then they called it AppX, and then they found that they couldn't do that because the company owned that one. So now AppX is just the internal technology, not the product name. And now it's Windows Universal Programs. Doesn't that fall off the drum quickly? So Windows Universal Programs did one other thing that Microsoft was attempting, and we'll see how well that worked out for them, is as part of wooing back those developers that went to iOS, they wanted them all to use Visual Studio and the Windows Universal App Model, and then they could just, with small tweaks, mostly for the purpose of form factor on the display issues, have a version that would run on all of these other operating systems. So it would run under Windows, it would run under the Windows, oh sorry, we don't have Windows Phone now, do we? It would run under iOS, and it would run under Android. That was the promise on that. And of course, did the developers come? Where are games developed today? I'll look at you, Sean. Where are games developed today?
Consoles mostly, and phones.
Consoles and phones, yeah. Doesn't happen here. So it didn't really work out for them so much. So that was Plan B. So then we had Plan C, now called Windows Bridges, originally Project Centennial. And the idea with Plan C was, okay, Mr. Software Developer, we're going to make it easy for you to get some of your old stuff to work in this new model. So you're going to go through this converter. You might have to change a little bit of source code, but hopefully we'll keep it small, and we'll convert your apps, and then you'll be able to put them up in the store. Everyone wants to be in the store, right? Okay, well, they did that. Now, I'm not getting audio, so I'm just going to skip past this. But this is a video they did in the announcement for Centennial. And in it, John Sheehan. Now, John Sheehan used to work for Softricity. He was there during the transition. He was responsible for such winning programs like AppD for servers. Anybody deploy that one? No, okay. But he was responsible for Project Centennial when it happened. And at the time he owned MSI. And in this video, he really goes through in detail about how an application installs in Windows and how it basically craps all over the operating system and it makes your operating system slower. And this is the reason why after a couple of years you really want to wipe it all out and start all over, because everything's fast again all of a sudden. But he really deprecates the MSI model and really says it's old and crappy, and yes, I own it, so I'm allowed to say that is the final line he puts in there. So Centennial, as it turned out, wasn't terribly successful. They actually got more interest from the IT pros than they got from the software developers, because the software developers that tried it found out that most of their software just wouldn't work in it. The breadth of the API that Centennial supported was too small. So basically anything that was such as an out-of-process COM object, a Windows service, it just totally invalidated your product. It wasn't going to work in that model. So there was very, very few things that ever got released in that manner and put up in the store. And we don't actually know which ones they are because they're not really identified in the store. So I know Evernote is one. That's one that Microsoft talks about in keynotes. I've yet to hear them talk about a second one. I'm sure there's one or two out there. I actually did one, and then we put it up in the store. But there's very little that's out there. So now we got to Plan D. So we'll see how well Plan D works. So Plan D, it says 2018. I put it in parentheses because that's really the announcement point. What Microsoft has said, and they haven't really given any dates, is they said, look, we're going to release this technology over the next several releases. To me, that means RS5, RS6, and RS7. 2019, 2020, 21, and we'll have it complete, assuming they keep to the schedule. They have released not enough detail about it today, so we don't exactly know everything in it. But as it turns out, the first bits were released Wednesday night, Thursday night?
Wednesday.
Yeah, Wednesday night. So Thursday morning I woke up and found, ooh, hey, they released some stuff. So you can just publicly go out and you can get the latest insider build. You have to use the skip ahead one. And that provides some runtime support, supposedly, for MSIX in there. And then you can get the Windows SDK and build your own MSIX. However, at this point, it's a Dutch audience, so maybe I'll work it this way. It would be like going to the coop. You go to the coop and you ask for your struffelwaffles, and they say, I'm sorry, sir, we're all out of struffelwaffles, but if you walk out in the back, we've got a maple tree. You can tap the maple tree, you can boil down the syrup, and then there's a wheat field just behind that, so you can just like grind your own grain and you can make your own struffelwaffle. And that's about what it is with MSIX right now. So technically, yes, I can go build one, but I wasn't going to get it done in time for this conference. All right, so what is MSIX? I break it down into two pieces. In one part, it's a format. It's a replacement for the MSI output that an ISV would give. The other part is a runtime piece. Now, from a format perspective, I like what they're doing. Okay, the MSI was a quote-unquote database, but quite frankly, it was a database in the form of it had some tables with columns and rows and stuff in it. But it didn't have the advantages of a database in that you'd have a table here with some information, and you'd have a table here with some information, and there would be relationships between those, but there's nothing in the database to describe those relationships. That's only in people's minds, and if you make a change up here, you have to know you make the change down there. And so the tooling and the people involved with trying to manipulate MSIs have to be aware of that. Moving to a XML, just a second, let me finish this and I'll get to you. Moving to an XML type of structure provides an opportunity to provide more of that relationship data in there. Simply out of the box, of course, we're going to get a hierarchical structure, which is going to help a lot, but there's an opportunity to do more. So, question to that.
So you say there's no relation. So I have learned that if, for instance, you have free MSI, free installations of MSI packaged applications, they will, and you have some DLL files that are, the same. It will add a counter in the table so that it will only remove the DLL file when the last application is installed.
That's in terms of the implementation going down. So the comment was if I had 3 different MSIs and they were deploying the same DLL, it wouldn't actually write the same DLL 3 times. You'd get a counter that says, hey, it's in use this many times, and do that type of management. And that is absolutely correct. But I'm talking about within the MSI file itself, right? Yeah, within that file, as you start to manipulate things inside because you want to modify that MSI, then you have to be aware of those relationships. They're not really called out. Right. Okay. The runtime piece of this is that the MSIX will run in a container. So AppX runs in a container. The Windows Bridges stuff runs in a container. We can stretch the word container to mean a lot of things. I do a ton of stuff with AppV. We never use the word container with AppV, but okay, we could call it container because that's the cool thing if we wanted to. But the question is how flexible that container will be. And that was part of the problem with Centennial, is that the container wasn't flexible enough. And Microsoft has indicated what they're doing here is they're extending the definition of the container to make it more flexible. So hopefully, if you listen to some of the words in the videos that Microsoft did during those conferences, everything we have today is going to run in this environment. I need way more beers to say that without smiling. I can tell you, everything is not going to run in there, and what we don't know is what will and what won't.
Somebody help move him in.
Yeah, sure, bring me a beer. Okay, at the same time.
What's the photo?
So Microsoft's, thank you very much.
I used to be the big guy.
Microsoft's going to have a, cheers. So Microsoft really has three parts to their messaging associated with it. To themselves, to their software developers, and to the IT community itself. Okay. So I'm going to go through the different parts of it. I hope you use this deck for different things. This should be their real slogan, I think. You know? All right, so what does Microsoft say to themselves? Because internally, I got to tell you, the last few years, Microsoft has gotten more and more inbred. As an MVP, they used to work with us much more openly when we had conversations, and they listen to what we have to say. And they've really kind of changed that with how they deal with the community. They deal with isolated groups, and when they deal with them, they come with specific questions to ask that group because they're looking for certain answers. And it's really not the same kind of listening. And I think it's starting to affect them across a number of different things. But you know, these are the kind of issues that Microsoft is thinking about these days. They fully believe that everyone wants to buy services and not products anymore. They're worried about the security of the platform, and rightfully so. They have a lot of needs there, and they're really responsible for solving some of the problems that we have today. And they want to get out from under the weight of now the 30 years of Windows API legacy support. Yes?
I know you wouldn't know, but you have an idea why this is changing, the openness and the discussion?
No, I don't know. I don't really know. And I think it's a cyclical kind of thing. I'm not to just leave that off. It's fallen off 3 times in the last 2 hours. I think it's cyclical, you know, the way they companies deal with community, and I'm sure it'll come back again as they start to realize they're missing in on some key input. So that would be my guess. Right. All right. Yeah, this is the messaging that we hear. It's the stuff that John Sheehan was talking about 2 and 3 years ago, and it's just sort of become reiterated. You'll hear bits and parts of this if you watch any of the videos from Build. You'll see individual little lines pulled up to that. And it's become internalized within Microsoft. You know, somebody says something, somebody hears something from a customer, and they repeat it, and internally it just becomes gospel. That's the way the world is. So that's where we're at. So you know, they're worried about these things, and you know, the bottom line there, a static desktop is not a service, and since service is important, they want to get away from having that static desktop. All right, so Microsoft does actually admit to the things that are here. They said, oh, well, okay, you didn't like AppX enterprises. And of course, you didn't like AppX because there weren't really any enterprise apps for you there. It was really consumer apps. So, okay, you didn't like Centennial. We tried that, it didn't work out so well. So trust us, we're going to get it right this time. That's what they believe. Now, I already talked about all that stuff. Okay, so enough about Microsoft. You folks, right? So what's important to you? What is their messaging to you? Well, right. So if you ask an ISV what the process looks like of their software getting delivered in the enterprise, the ISV and the developer think it looks like this. They build an installer, they give it to you, and somebody installs it somewhere and it works. As simple as that. Of course, it's not as simple as that. It's something more like this. This is the kind of process that you're going through today. As you bring in software, you've got all of these various steps you go through. And as you go from Windows XP to Windows 7, you take all of the applications and you have to go through this process all again. And in the Microsoft talk, you're doing it again as you go to Windows 10. Now, if you are going through that again, going to Windows 10, you are a fool. Because the application compatibility between Windows 7 and Windows 10 is fantastic. And you're wasting a lot of energy. A lot of the time I spend with customers is trying to convince them they shouldn't be bringing me in. They really should be going through a process of understanding how the operating system is different, assume the apps will work, and do spot level testing where you need to, and just spend that energy on remediation when you find out there's a problem, and not spend all of this time going through this process again and again. Yes, Thomas?
There are tons of applications that doesn't work in Windows 10.
Sorry?
There are tons of applications that doesn't work in Windows 10.
I'm missing two words here.
There are tons of applications that doesn't work in Windows 10.
Okay, such as?
There's so Katia.
Okay, so you're saying there are a ton. Okay.
It's
Two.
no, but it's not like
It's a bit heavy, so it's
I like this.
So what kind of percentage of the apps you see an enterprise deploying don't work?
So this is for automotive, airspace, and.
Okay. So it may not be a high percentage, but it's very high to that one particular.
No, but
Yes,
I'm just saying, if that didn't get tested and you just thought it worked, it's extremely dangerous.
Right, and that would be the kind of app that you certainly would make sure that's in your test list. Yes.
Always test.
Okay. Always test. Okay, that's good. It's always nice to have disagreement, right? All right. So Microsoft's pitch here is that with MSIX, you're not going to have to do that. Okay? That when a new version of an application rolls out, or a new operating system rolls out, that you're going to be able to roll out the new operating system, and the customizations that you made in the original software are going to continue to work on the new one. That's their promise, whether or not you believe them. That's their promise. Okay. So what are we doing in the way of packaging? We're taking in these applications today, we're customizing them, we're taking out features that we don't want to deploy out. We're trying to reduce the impact of that software, particularly as we're using virtualization techniques to use them, such as a VDI or in a XenApp type of environment. Often we're transforming or repackaging that software. And there's a lot of work being done as part of automating that process and getting silent installs so that as you go through this process, hopefully it'll be a little easier going forward in the future. Yes, Sean?
Tim, I know you spend a lot of time consulting. Can you tell me what possesses organizations to always repackage software versus transforming it? It doesn't seem like it's that hard of a concept, but I can't tell you the number of companies I went to, but they're like, oh, we repackage everything. I'm like, but it's an MSI. All you got to do is create a transform. Oh, we don't trust that crazy voodoo transform stuff. Why would you want to do that?
I don't understand that.
Do you see
if they're getting an MSI. I do understand it if they're getting an EXE from the vendor. They do want to do it because they want to take out all of those dependencies that the EXE puts down.
Sure.
And so that would be part of that process.
Okay, and I'm a little
But beyond that, yeah, I agree with you. I don't understand it. All right. So in the AppD world, we've been making some progress over the years with how we go through that process. And just sort of quickly bring you up to date with some of the things that I've been doing as part of that. We've got AppD 5 that's been out for quite a number of years here. And I have a free tool called FDA Manage that we typically use after the sequencing portion of that. So we sequence the app, we bring it into that tool. We use that as sort of our testing platform to do the first level of testing. Is this thing working? Do we need to do some other tweaks? But I've been doing a lot of work in the last couple of years to extend what we do there to help the process work better. And so what we're doing today is we're producing better applications than we were a few years ago without any real extra effort. And we're fixing problems that the vendor did, and we're also fixing problems with the virtualization technology and AppD and working through those. So the way that process is working is I added a bunch of analysis in the AppD Manage. So after we do the capture, it analyzes that package and recognizes things that are probably wrong or that you want to know about. So some of it is just plain informational. Hey, this is a package that integrates with SharePoint. Did you know that? Most of the time, the enterprise doesn't know the app. That's not going to be part of their test plan if they don't know that up front. But we'll also provide some fixes for some problems. And with some other software that I released that's also free up there called Passive Install, we get a PowerShell script out of here, then we can go back and we can resequence that package and get all of those problems fixed. So that's a process we've been using here in this last year. And now right now I've got another product that is currently in beta. This one's not going to be free, okay? FDA Manage is something that I kind of do on my side, and it's really become ingrained in the process of a lot of enterprises. There's probably about 1,000 enterprises that are using that as part of their standard process right now around the world. So the new product, TM Edit, is going to streamline this process a little bit better. It's going to do the same kind of analysis, but rather than have to go back through the process of sequencing again, it's just going to fix the package for you. This allows me to fix the things I was doing before, plus things that I couldn't fix that way because the sequencer would break it again. So we'll end up with a little better packages. This, along with getting the silent installs, I got to tell you, I've never been a big fan of silent installs and automating this stuff, but I started doing this last year, and what I have found is that the quality of the package I produce has gone up significantly. In the past, I'd do something, I'd see a little something, and unless I had to go back to the package, I probably wouldn't really touch it because it wasn't that important. Now that I've got this automation going on, it is just so easy to say, let me tweak the script, hit the button, go get a cup of coffee, it'll be done when I'm back, or go work on something else. And I find myself doing that more and more, and the packages are getting better and better. So we're deploying packages now that work better, that have the things that the vendors didn't necessarily put in, things like application app paths. So app paths is something that affects Windows search. When the user goes to the flag or the Cortana button, they start typing in the app, it shows up immediately through the pattern match without them having to put in the full name of the executable. Just little things like that that help the end user experience. Application capabilities registration, which solves the problem of file association conflict, takes it out of the hands of IT of dictating which application will work with this particular file type, and puts it back into the hands of the end user. So they can right click and say, hey, I want this one to be my default app. If that registration is included, we get that automatically. And this isn't just an AppD thing. You can be doing this with any type of repackaging that you're doing. All right, so this is just a quick screenshot here of the FDA Manage Analyzer, where it'll do some things in yellow to highlight, hey, there's some things here you might want to look at, and then that button down at the bottom. You're never going to see that laser pointer on here, are you? Down at the bottom here, install the fix-ups that produces the PowerShell script for you. This is a screenshot from the new tool. So we would just open up the AppD package, the analysis would run, and you'd get a whole bunch of fix buttons that'll just fix the package directly, as well as giving you another chance to go in and do any last-minute editing you need to do without really having to go back and open it up in the sequencer. We're also improving the compression ratio on this, by the way. It turns out that the AppD sequencer compresses the stuff in what's basically a zip compression. They use the worst form of compression I've ever seen. And so as part of this, I'm just recompressing. I'm saving between 5 and 15% disk size on these packages. And it's not a CPU trade-off type of thing. At the client side, you use the same amount of CPU resources to decompress in either case. So you're really saving on disk space and transmission costs when you bring those packages over. All right. So this is what I do see happening in the enterprise quite a bit as I talk with companies. They bring an application in, and they don't do the process once. They have different teams that have totally different processes from each other. And so if they're doing Configuration Manager, they're using probably Flexera and Admin Studio to do some repackaging. Maybe some of that goes into the image. Sometimes it's a different group that's putting things in the image as well. If they're doing AppD, because they're probably doing Citrix, then they've got a different process and a different group that's going through the sequencing process. If they're doing any type of app layering, it's again probably a different group of people that do that. And I see these companies do this over and over again. It just doesn't make any sense to me. A couple of years ago, I wrote a white paper to try to address this from my idea. There's a link to it in the slide. And the concept was, why don't we build one really good tool chain that produces a format that we could then use different tools to deploy these different methods. So we could do it just once and do it right. And so that's the call that I put out and said, hey, let's go with that. Now when I wrote that, I said, you know, when I look at what we have out there, right now AppD is the closest thing to that central format, but we don't have this other tooling to say, let's take that format and put it out. And I say that because when you look at the app layering products, they'll be using VHDs to do things, and they tend to have problems with taking that particular format and putting it on different operating systems. And that's one thing that AppD has been really good at through its variabilization of what's in that format, so that we can really have good portability between operating systems once we've done that capture. So that was what I asked for. And I doubt that anybody at Microsoft actually read that, but I'm going to take credit for MSIX being exactly what I asked for. Except not quite. But it's close. All right. So developers, what's the story they're giving to developers? Last year I wrote this book called The Application Book. I actually announced it here at ED in Rome, I think it was. Yeah. And the idea was to take the Windows API and do a reversal of it for the purpose of the IT Pro. And when I do that, I kind of break down the Windows API into these 4 categories. There are integrations into the operating system, integrations into the end user experience, integrations for data, and integrations into other applications. As we take a look at the containerized world of UWP, this last one is the one that really gets cut off the most. And what do enterprises want to do? They want to buy software from a bunch of different vendors. That's one way of getting your time done. Okay, let's try that again. Should have put it down and had a drink of beer. All right. So it's those integrations to other applications. What you do as an enterprise, you buy all of these applications and you build workflows. So a particular user has a task that they need to do, and it's usually not a single application. They start here, they go to here, they go to this other one. And interfering with that workflow here is one of the challenges. And one of the things that we have to make sure that we properly solve. Here we go. Here. Thank you. Here, right here.
Cheers.
Oh my. Before he came to the ED first time, he said, I'm not drinking.
You've cured me, Alex.
I know.
All right, so that's one of the challenges we have to solve as we move forward with the new models. Okay.
That was patching application. That's better.
Applications patch, thank you. All right, so the traditionally installed app, there's a lot of things it can't do without Elevation. With Elevation, it can do anything it wants. So this is part of their pitch to developer. We need you to stop doing that. We need to be able to control you to secure the operating system, and that's why we're doing these things. So if you think about server containers, the Docker stuff on the server, the idea is that the application gets a full view of the operating system. You can see everything, but it really can't change anything. So it's safe, right? You can just write your stuff in there, and if you do something bad, that's okay. We'll protect the operating system, and when you're done at the sandbox, we'll throw that crap away. Right? So on the desktop operating system, we have the same container implementation there. And that's what AppX and the Centennial stuff runs in. It gets this view of the whole operating system. But there are a few prescribed things that you can change, but it's very, very controlled and it's safe things. And that's the Microsoft model going forward. Now, app virtualization was great, but it did all of this redirection and spoofing as a way to accomplish the task. And it does make a lot of applications which would do bad things not do bad things anymore, particularly through that redirection. So if they want to write to the program file, it gets redirected to a safe area in the user's app data local, typically type of folder. So that's good, but we use it for a lot of remediation. So if we have some bad eggs, we can often remediate them as part of this process and make them good. But ultimately, the really bad eggs are still going to be rotten. We can't solve everything from the bad things that apps used to do. Well, in terms of API coverage, right, the Windows API is at 30 years old, it's really big. For this thing to scale properly, this monitor has to go like down the street before I hit the next button. So I can't do that, so I made the next display bigger than it should be so that you can actually see it. But this is the scope of the AppX API. It's very, very tiny, okay? It's intentionally very tiny so that they could have that portability, what they call .NET Core, so that it could run on these other operating systems as well. And that's the real limitation for someone trying to write an enterprise app. They basically can't do much. Centennial extended that, and it gave a bigger API surface, but it really wasn't big enough. So the question now becomes, what will MSIX look like? Right? If I listen to the video, it's going to be everything. But it might not be. We don't really know. There are some specs out there that we can look at. So up on GitHub, they've got the specs for the current versions of the MSIX internal format. But it's incomplete. They're fixing it as they go along. It's my guess that if MSIX covers 50% of the existing applications, then they will succeed in their mission. It will take a long time, but everything will eventually come this way. If they do 70 to 80%, then very, very quickly we will see mass adoption of MSI. The developers will go there. You'll be demanding that they go there. Microsoft's going to try to make some tools so that if you don't have a developer that was doing it, or maybe you have old legacy stuff yourself, you'll be able to convert existing apps without source code into MSIX format as well. So if there's enough API there, we'll get some quick adoption when it's done. Which, when did I say it was going to be done?
2021?
That'd be my guess. Assuming they stay on schedule. Centennial was supposed to be 1 year, it took 2. So we'll see. All right, so TeamSpeak, what do I know that's out here as well? All right, so from a format perspective, Centennial was really the AppX format with an extension on the schema. AppV was the AppX format with an extension on the schema. MSIX will be the same, although it looks to me like it's actually several extensions, so it's a little more confusing that way. But that's the concept, okay? It is just an extension on the AppX that allows us a wider footprint of the things that we're allowed to do and what the definition of an application when it gets put down should be. All right. I talked about that. There we go. This is Microsoft's diagram here on the right-hand side of the MSIX format and what it looks like. Question in the back.
MSIX, is that going to be something that's deployed to mobile operating systems as well? Or is that still going to be a PPX?
I'm trying to remember if I know. So the question was, is MSIX going to be deployed to the other operating systems? And the answer is no. It can only work on operating systems that support, ultimately, the APIs we're talking about. So we're really talking about Windows 10, and there's no promise of backward compatibility to Windows 7, which kind of makes sense if you think about the Windows 7 end of life date. By the time they get it done, it makes no sense to backport that stuff. But we'll see.
So something I know about, they are giving this SDK which is cross-compilable on Apple and other platforms, but I don't think they'll run it there. It's just something which they can compile, and it won't, I don't think the Wi-Fi will be running.
Okay, so that means that enterprise applications will never run on Android and iOS.
Yes, I think that is exactly what that means.
That was always true.
That's always been true. It's not going to change, right? All right, so if you've ever taken an AppV file and renamed it to a .zip, you've always been able to open it up and you'll see that there's a folder there and all the files go in there. And then there's this metadata. There'll be a registry file. There's some XML files that describe the application and all of those APIs in an XML format. And MSIX is very much the same. So that AppX manifest we see here is similar to the one that AppV has today. It's just going to have a different syntax of what the schema is, but the concepts are the same. What we won't have in MSIX is we won't have streaming, but quite frankly, I don't think streaming is all that important, so I don't worry about that. They are adding some security, so we'll do the code integrity right in the package, which I think is the right way to do that. And they're also doing some things in terms of the deployment. So when MSIX comes down, it's going to be single instance, is what they're telling us. That means that if you have an application that has a particular DLL or file and another one that has it, there's only going to be a footprint for one of those down on the system. So it'll be single instance automatically as part of the runtime.
2 minutes left.
2 minutes, yeah, okay, no problem. She started being way late. That's my excuse. All right. So yeah, we're pretty close to there. So you know, in terms of workflows, what they're saying is that this process for you is going to be more like a transform. Okay, you're going to take the package from the vendor, you're going to write a little bit of XML that you put with it, and that's where your customizations are going to go. It'll act much more like a transform. But there's some other things here. So how do you extend it? How do I take this application and another application and put them in what would be the equivalent of an AppX bundle and together? And when we do that, how does that mapping go? That's one of the questions that we just don't know at all right now. This is a diagram they used in the slides to try to describe it. It's a horrible slide from a technical standpoint, but the concept is UWP had one way to manage the app. Centennial sort of extended it with some file and registry redirection, and what they're doing now is they're providing the ability for a wider set of interactions with the API. That's the way that I would interpret that particular slide from them. There is this thing called the Package Support Framework. So in the videos, we saw them manually doing some remediations for an app. So here's an app, it wants to write to an INI file in the program directory. Here's a checkbox that is checked that says, hey, I'm going to automatically redirect that for you. I did talk with Stefan Wick, who's the program manager, about that video, and he indicated to me that that isn't something somebody's going to have to manually do. The concept is this is something that should be automated, which was part of my argument, because things like AppV automatically do that without anyone having to think about it. It just says, hey, you're trying to write here, we know that's bad, let's just move it over. It's similar to what Priya was talking about with some of their stuff. But there will be capabilities of doing much, much more through this framework. So ultimately, you're using a JSON file as a way to describe what you want, but a developer can also write code to do things as well as a way of remediations. So we'll be able to basically fully transform these things going forward, is the promise. How easy that will be, how well the tool vendors will make tools to make this easy for us. That's some of the things that will play out over the next few years that we'll have to pay attention to. All right, so I talked about, you know, what's the percentage of apps that are actually going to be covered in here is the big question for me, or how fast this will really roll out in the enterprise. The amount of flexibility in that container, I think, is huge, and again, it's a huge unknown to us. We're going to find out over the next few years. But the column on the right, you know, the OS is protected, things like that. I think those are really important going forward. Yes, Mr. Boss.
So Tim, a question for you, because back in the early days of AppV, we always told customers that AppV is not a security boundary. Clearly, most of the container world, whether it's Docker, Kubernetes, or whatever, people seem perfectly okay with running containers side by side and assume that the Linux kernel is going to isolate and protect you. And on the Windows container, the same assumption is made. But speak to me as a developer, if you have shared kernel memory between containers, do you ever feel like you can safely assume that one cannot tamper with your container contents if they were able to privilege elevate and take over the system? Or more processor level vulnerability? Would you feel safe that container isolation is a secure enough boundary?
That depends who I am. I think for a lot of customers out there, the answer is yes, I feel perfectly safe. I think for certain customers that are out there, no way in hell, right? Certainly keeping the processes from becoming elevated is a huge win if we can do that. There's really no reason an out-of-process COM object needs to be elevated in most cases, but it automatically is, right? So if we can just safely eliminate those kinds of things, I think a lot of the stuff we have will continue to work and we'll get that safety built in. Great question. Yes, okay, fine. So, all right. So this is Microsoft's proposal on how this works. I had a slide earlier about my ideal world, and I talked about how we want one method to do this to get the format, and then have different ways to put out. But this is where Microsoft is thinking today. There's just going to be one way you're going to run it in that container. I think there's an opportunity. It's after that slide. To do better. So my model on what Microsoft is doing is they're building the plane on the fly. They're still trying to figure out how it's going to land. It might look like that. It might look like this. It might look like that. Okay, we don't really know. We're not going to know until they finish the job and we try to land the plane. So what I'd like to see ultimately, though, is have the vendors actually take a look at this and think about the format differently from the implementation. The format for MSIX is probably pretty cool. I really want them to extend it beyond what they're going to implement on their path. That would allow us to do some of these other things as well. I think the format needs to do that, and we need to push Microsoft, and I'm asking the other vendors who are doing the tooling stuff to join me in that, to try to push Microsoft to allow us to define the best format possible for all the things that we want to do. We'll have to wait and see how that works. The format is technically open source under GitHub, but ultimately Microsoft is the one that accepts the push or not. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. So that is my last slide, Alex.